Well, thank you, everybody. It's really good to have you all on. Today, it's not an unusual topic to think about how businesses changed as a result of the COVID crisis. And what's interesting is in the research that we're doing right now, and the Digital Banking Report is doing 7 different studies right now. And what we're finding is everything is changing on an ongoing basis. There's no pre and post COVID because we're not post COVID yet. But we're seeing that a lot of the habits, a lot of the traditions, a lot of the movements in the industry are truly changing and still evolving. And the longer it becomes like this, the more settled, the more permanent some of the things will be. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Jim Roos. I'm the co-publisher of the Financial Brand and owner and publisher of the Digital Banking Report, as well as the host of the podcast Banking Transformed. When we have a great panel today to discuss how financial services, banks, insurers, wealth management organizations have responded to the COVID crisis and how they will continue to reflect, reimagine, innovate, and redo their business models based on what we're seeing. Before we get into who's on the panel today, let me just go through who is on the panel. So next slide. Today, just so it's clear, we're going to be going over the crisis challenges in planning, the best practices and sustainability, employee engagement and connect organizations, which really has to do as much with work at home as anything else. The rapid fire session where we're going to ask our panelists a few quick questions and then some parting thoughts. On today's panel, we have 3 very esteemed members of the Cisco organization. We have Tom Philippe, the Financial Services Lead for America's Industry from Cisco. We have Chris Swan, the VP of Channel Sales and Business Development for Acronym, and Jake Peterson, Customer Experience Strategy Leader for HelpShift. So let's see, where are we today? Next slide. Basically, COVID-19 has transformed and disrupted every part of our daily life, from the way we work, the way we interact, to the way we go about our daily lives. We've never seen such a huge shift in such a short time. In fact, when we look at the digital banking aspect of what we're talking about here, we have probably seen over a decade of changes in the last 4 months. And these changes continue to evolve, continue to change over time, and continue to get more ingrained in our daily behavior. Now, if a person's going to Amazon to purchase something or is having their groceries or meals delivered by a digital service, these are all brand new activities that many of us had never done before. In the banking world, it may have involved taking a picture of a check to deposit it, or it may have been just finding ways to transfer funds. Next slide. I think what's interesting about this time period, as we look at it, is that overall, we not only disrupted the way we do things, but who we interact with. In much of the world, it came to a complete standstill. Roads were vacated, businesses were closed, and the way we went about everything that we were used to changed. Right now, still, there's a lot of people out of work. While in the US, at least, some of these people are starting to return, they're all fearful that whole process will reverse itself again. This included banks, investment firms, wealth management firms, included insurance companies. Everything that we were used to doing changed because of the closure of the physical structures. I think what's interesting is we look at all the things that changed. One of the biggest changes is most of us were moved to an at-home environment. An at-home environment that really wasn't structured in any way to handle 1 or maybe 2 workers that had not used home as a permanent workplace. Adding to that dynamic was the fact that kids were also home. We were educating our children at the same time we were supposed to be doing our work. Our work days extended on average of 3 hours a day as people did more and more with less and less time. We saw offices being developed, in many cases in kitchens or in living rooms or in the most unusual places imaginable as we started to work towards a more permanent solution. For those of you like me that work from my office and had been doing it in the past, some of our offices became studios with indirect lighting, microphone systems, maybe even a teleprompter for things that we're doing like this. I think what's interesting, though, is during the whole process, people also had time to disrupt themselves as well as disrupt the companies they were working with. Many of these people were put in charge of changing on a dime the digital nature of the way you did business. At some financial institutions, such as TD Bank in the Northeast, their entire call center has been told now that they can work at home on a permanent basis, coming in as they wish to work in the traditional facilities. Those offices that had moved to a more modern structure where people were able just to plug and play at a different location every day, those are being completely upgrounded and changed because that's no longer a safe distance away to work in the future. We also had time to evaluate our service providers. Who is there? Who is faking digital versus really having digital in place? I think what we found also is as we moved from a work at home environment, we all had to work in an environment that did not do banking as we knew it. We moved from a mix of physical and digital to digital only. Grandparents who had never once deposited a check in any place else but in a branch learned how to do remote deposit capture. They also learned how to engage with the branch in new ways, sometimes by phone, sometimes video, or sometimes not at all. This will not go back to normal. There are studies that say that at least 40% of the people that have moved from a branch-based banking model to digital are not going to go back. And early indications are it can even be lower than that. So what do we do with those branches we had in place? What do we do with all of the interactions that used to be done in the traditional way? We only have time to tell. I think what we see overall is that the consumer now wants to be able to interact on their time, on their device, at all points of contact. They may use their mobile phone. They may use a computer. But they want it all to be seamless. They want it to be simple. They want it all to feel on a top-of-mind engagement that is easy to do. What we see is what the consumers want. They want to be able to engage in the simplistic, non-friction way, the way that people engage today with PayPal, Netflix, Uber, Amazon, Instacart, and even WebEx. What we want is the fewest number of clicks to get from point A to point B. In fact, customer experience is being defined by how easy it is to transact with an organization. When a person talks about convenience in a digital world, they're talking about how easy can I get in and get out of a transaction, and how easy it is to engage on any device and go from point A to point B without it looking or feeling different. What we need to do is realize that the simplicity that the consumers become used to during COVID is the simplicity we need to go forward. I think what we need to do also is we have to realize that more than ever, innovation in processes, products, back office procedures is going to be key. It's going to be the top of the agenda of what people have to be focused on. When you're talking about digital transformation, the key element of that is innovation. And we see that these run parallel, that those organizations that are best at digital transformation are moving forward the quickest on innovation. They get the highest customer experience numbers. They also have the highest profitability. So what we're going to be talking about today is how we can change, how we can adjust our businesses, how we can disrupt ourselves for the new environment that is in the future. So as I mentioned, we have a number of people on the panel today. In the panel, why don't we, rather than me introducing people that they have a better idea of who they are than I do, I think what we're going to start is we're going to go through the presenters today and have them introduce themselves in a few words. Tom, do you want to start that off?
Sure thing, Jim. Hi, everyone. Tom Phillip here. I'm America's financial services lead in Canada, the U.S., and Latin America.
Hey guys, Chris Swan. I lead the Cisco practice globally for Acquion. Pleasure to be here.
Hey everyone, Jake Peterson. I run customer experience strategy here at HelpShift.
That's great. I think what we have to look at is, as I mentioned, almost everything has changed in the way we engage and the way we transact with our customers. But each one of these has brought a new challenge. And what we found was in our studies is that these challenges are changing over time. What may have been challenging in the beginning of March is not the same challenges we have today. Some of the challenges we have today are not about how do we transact with the consumer digitally, because I hope we figured that out by now, but might be a much broader perspective, and under the umbrella realizing that some of these challenges may have to do with financials. Because the way we're doing banking and the financial relationships with our consumers, but also our financials internally, are changing dramatically. So, Jake, why don't you start us off? What are the, probably from your perspective, the most pressing issues we have right now, the biggest challenges?
Sure. I mean, look, there's no doubt things have changed, and many of us on the call had no idea how impacted our businesses were going to be during this crisis. And from a financial services, just like you were saying a little bit earlier, Jim, we aren't out of the woods by any means yet, right? The next months are really going to dictate where things are going. But from a technology perspective, what I can address a bit in each of the points I'm going to talk about today is what I've been calling, or what some folks in the industry have been calling, a sprint to the starting line when it comes to most financial services firms' approach to digital transformation. So, given the rapid shift in moving of agents and employees from an office or contact center to work from home, and changing customer expectations in the type of immediacy and expectation of support, has led to this quote-unquote sprint to the starting line in digital transformation. What this is essentially brands and businesses now making this realization that going digital and providing stellar remote services is needed, and they're all trying to identify what does this specifically mean for them or to their business. So they're all running to their starting point of these transformation steps and investments, trying to decide, okay, with an entire remote workforce, where do we invest the ability for human interaction, and where do we transition our customers to a exceptional digital customer experience? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. So more to come on that.
Tom, from your perspective, what have you seen from the biggest challenges perspective?
Thanks, Jim. As you mentioned earlier, unforeseen challenges, but also tremendous opportunities. Now it's critically important for IT and business decision makers to show strong leadership and take a holistic view of what does the overall enterprise look like? What is your overall strategy? What are you trying to do as a business during COVID and long term? And what are the processes and sub-processes that can be digitized to help customers and gain competitive market share? So specifically, some of the opportunities that we see are, since COVID, certainly customer self-service, AI and automation are increasingly in demand. Most non-branch staff, except for critical functions, are work from home. In fact, we see in the U.S. in work from home data, you alluded to some of it earlier, but from IMetrics, 80% of U.S. employees want to work from home, at least partially, and 51% of millennials, if not more, would change jobs for the opportunity to work remotely full-time. In financial services, we consistently hear 70 to 80% of that operating model shift working from home, and actually one personal lines insurance company as high as 98%, with shifting that model. Also, financial services is well suited for a remote workforce. Branches have reduced staff with limited customer access. We're seeing a high contact center surge in call volumes, as Chris will allude to from Acquion shortly, which are certainly exceeding handling capacity. Certain job roles, such as equity traders, have specialized remote work needs. And of course, data security is a top priority. And just a couple of other hot buttons that we see, Jim, adjusting the work environment for critical functions to reflect what those social distancing guidelines will be, and also the rapid operational support in order to quickly process the government relief packages that we're seeing from the pandemic.
You know, it's interesting, Tom. Everything you mentioned is such a global change. It's the entire organization. I think one thing we forget about, and we talk about when we talk about digital transformation, is how much has to do with the culture and leadership. Do you have the leadership and culture in place to implement all these massive changes that are going on right now? And that, you know, that's an interesting dynamic when you look at it from a corporate standpoint, is that it's not just one moving part. It's a lot of moving parts. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So as I was saying, we're seeing, you know, three primary themes as banks, you know, move into the next phase of COVID, you know, and attempt to establish, you know, the new normal, if you will. First theme is really around re-engagement with the customer. It's going to be critical for banks to have a really solid strategy on how they re-engage with their customers and also with their employees. You know, to Tom's point, you know, many folks are going to expect to be able to continue to work from home indefinitely. You know, and branch closures really changed up the dynamic from how, you know, customers got used to dealing with their banks, and, you know, lo and behold, you know, they really enjoyed that ability to not have to go into the branch and conduct business. You know, and to your earlier point around digital adoption, right? That's, you know, somewhat widened the you know, if you will, the gap between the customer and the, you know, the personal banker, if you will. COVID-19 really widened that chasm, right? So banks are kind of staring down the how do we engage with customers now that we've been socially distant. You know, and I also think that, you know, customers got used to being over communicated with. You know, the amount of volume of communication coming out of banks certainly rose during, you know, COVID times, and, you know, getting personal notes from CEOs and whatnot via email. You know, what was a good touch. I think consumers are going to expect that to continue. You know, and from, you know, the perspective of remote interaction, right? Digital telebanking is here to stay. Customers, you know, myself included, really happy with the ability to conduct business without having to, you know, put myself at risk and walk into a branch. And, you know, I think it's really raised the bar in terms of expectations, you know, around what the bank can do, you know, versus your earlier statement on, you know, longstanding traditions that, you know, business had to be conducted in a branch. And then I think the third theme is really around, you know, being empathetic versus staying in business, right? You know, we know business in the future is going to be challenging, millions of people out of work, you know, an expected decrease in GDP, stimulus money and deferment programs already starting to go away. You know, so I think banks in the near future are really going to be impacted by customers who are having trouble, you know, making mortgage payments, paying off their credit cards, and, you know, as SMB type companies are impacted and, you know, potentially going out of business, you know, banks are going to need to really focus on, you know, maintaining their relationship and proactively engaging with those customers who are having trouble, because if they don't, you know, they'll end up losing them.
You know, that's an excellent point, Chris. I think one of the things that we forget about it, it's easy to be a great customer service organization when everything's going well. I talked about the fact that my bank, you know, was reaching out to me regularly about what I wanted to do with my retirement funds. And yet when things are going bad, it's a little bit harder, a little bit tougher to have those conversations. But believe me, at this time when everybody's under a lot of financial stress and personal stress from a family basis, I think we're going to remember who is there for us. You know, we always say that about personal friends, but now it's a situation, we have to our banks to be in that position. So with that in mind, let's go to our first poll question. It's on the same theme about the challenges and how organizations are working toward those. So the first poll question is what phase is your organization's response to COVID-19? Are you in a reactive phase, an adjustment phase, recovery, or are you proactive? Give me a couple seconds to complete this question. Okay. I think, in the research we've done with the digital banking report, we're finding that the majority, vast majority, are in the reactive phase. They're playing catch up. I think more and more organizations now are preparing for the future and moving, I wouldn't say proactive, because when you talk about proactive, you're looking at, are we really moving towards what the future is going to hold? And I think in a way we're at the banking industry, financial services industry, we're almost always in a reactive mode to the consumer. But I think what we're seeing is it's a whole lot less knee-jerk and a fill-in-the-gaps type situation. So, we'll get to the next section. The last time we saw a major overhaul in how financial firms operated was during the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, considered by many to be the most severe economic times since the Great Depression. The industry made a lot of adjustments then, but what we're seeing now is a major disruption that isn't really following a timeline, and we have no guidebook for it. This is not a financial crisis. This is a crisis with regard to how we do business and how we interact with consumers. So how does the panel feel about how we see this crisis changing how financial institutions overall plan for change, both expected and unexpected, in the future, with the knowledge that, we always talked about things could change overnight. Well, I don't think we ever expected that to happen. But, we just look at the digital world and think about how things change so quickly. Chris, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to your point, COVID really changed how banks are interacting. We've had some great statistics so far. Novantas basically came out with, much the same, 30% of branch visits were down 30% overall, and teller transactions down 32%, right? But the level of banking didn't actually decrease. So branch closures and work from home overturned some very long-held banking traditions around how banking had to be done, and we saw very quickly that customers adapted. Employees adapted, and lo and behold, we're hearing from our customers it's actually much more efficient. Some of our large banks, who have 4 or 5, 8,000 agents, who they shifted to work from home, they're actually seeing a much decreased, absenteeism, much increased, in terms of starting shifts on time. People are working longer hours in general. So, overall, it's been good for the bank in terms of, better employee circumstances, higher work productivity, overall, a better employee experience. So, moral of the story, the banks were able to, shift in a matter of days and weeks from how they conducted previously to adapt to make sure that, they could service their customers in a work from home model, and conduct telebanking sessions to make sure that, their customers stayed safe. I think their customers, employees are going to continue to expect the same type of business model. And then, as we move into this next phase of COVID, banks are really going to need to adjust their workflows in terms of how they're going to retain their customers. Relief and remediation for those who are experiencing financial hardship is going to be a must. Agents are going to need to be empowered to be able to have those conversations. And similarly, maintaining a positive brand image and commitment to the community is going to be very important. No bank or financial institution is going to want to be labeled as that institution that's making those hard driving collections calls when millions of people are out of work. So. And I'll wrap with I think being creative and proactive around how they deal with some of these situations for both their customers and employees is going to be super critical. To your earlier point, they're going to have to be creative around solving for some of these problems and do so quickly, right? Most everybody's being reactive. That's not going to cut it moving forward.
Jake, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a much different place technically, socially, and in many other places than we were in the last crisis, in the 2008 crisis. I think this same health crisis would have turned out very differently if it had happened in 2008. I mean, look at us sitting here on video conferencing on low effort, communicating with coworkers on Slack or other co-working tools. You wouldn't have had the the levels of business stability for the most part that we are generally having, even if this was 5 years ago. And I know we're not in any way near stable, but I think we would have been much worse off if we weren't as technology as advanced as we are today. From a technology perspective, the tools that we're able to use are more advanced and easier to implement than ever before. And I think that's helping us a lot, oftentimes kind of go through this digital transformation, setting up things like automations and in-app workflows. This isn't even going into, or I can go into a little bit about AI and NLP, which natural language processing. This is, pretty cutting edge and pretty new that didn't exist in the last crisis, being able to have an AI understand what customers are saying and report back on what's being said and kind of drive these custom experiences to your customers using that technology. Just an example, talking about us here at HelpShift, we have the ability to build what we call smart intents, where we can take 100,000 sample messages of what customers are saying to a business or a brand and build out these intent branches that are able to get an understanding of what customers are saying better than the brand has ever been able to date. We did this with a financial services company that works with us and asked them, send us 100,000 messages of what customers are saying. And at the same time, we asked them, why do you think customers are contacting you today? What are all your contact reasons? And they provided us a list, and they said they gathered this by customers self-selecting in IVRs, auditing a few hundred messages to see why customers were contacting them. And in basically 24 hours, we were able to give them down to the 0.1% the exact reasons all their customers were contacting them in 5 or more top level categories, and each under those 5 sub-reason categories and what we call intent and sub-intents. The incredible thing as well is if you had this set up before COVID happened and this adjusts, you'd quickly be able to see not why customers are necessarily tapping of why they're contacting or selecting the IVR, but what is their intent? What are they actually saying when they're communicating with you? Someone may select, I need help with a card-based or replace a card-based question, but you don't know that this is actually a fraud type issue, someone wanting to report. So these technologies are able to drive these really customized experiences and really provide these businesses this insight into what are our customers actually saying rather than what are they just selecting. So we've been building these solutions for businesses where customers can start on one channel, communicating what these issues are, continue to another channel to this kind of omni-channel asynchronous messaging, SMS, mobile chat, in-app chat, voice, while you're able to deliver this context back to the agent. I think it's been really powerful to see those successes most recently.
Thanks. When we look at this, a lot of organizations have already implemented new operating models and workflows. In fact, that being, the remote work or digitizing the customer experience and overall business operations. What are some of the best practices that the panel has seen, Tom and Chris, that you're seeing across the landscape? What should financial institutions be doing to be more sustainable in the future? Tom, do you want to start us off with that?
Jim, some of the priorities that we're seeing across banks, insurance companies, wealth managers, hedge funds, security firms, certainly the priorities are increased operational efficiency in the product and services distribution. You talked about the operating model. So really taking a hard look at what does that current state operating model look like pre-COVID and currently now going forward. So there's an even greater emphasis on digitizing operations. What are those processes or sub-processes within the end-to-end sales cycle or the claims cycle, for example, that can be improved and digitized in order to strengthen business operations. We're seeing a top-down cultural business transformation with virtual process changes, as we've mentioned. Also, agile service delivery models and data governance is really top of mind, especially when you think about financial services, very risk-averse and very strictly regulated across the board in FinServ. So some other priorities that we're seeing are, of course, around remote work. What is that optimal mix as far as working from home, for the split operations, reducing office and branch hours with the resilience to deliver services solely through digital channels. Having that employee productivity with seamless customer collaboration, having that mobile sales engagement, as Jake alluded to as well, and that worker mobility so that you can work from any place. But importantly within that is the threat detection and having the analytics for the AI and the data-driven insights. So the biggest accelerators that we're seeing include omni-collaboration, security, networking, and overall application performance.
You know, that's interesting, Tom, because one of the things that you referenced, we talked about the digitalization. And I had an article for the Financial Brand this week that said, banks have to stop faking digital. And I think organizations really have to realize that we're not talking about just taking what was done in the branch or done paper-wise and making it digital. It's actually looking internally and saying, how can we change the complete processes and the way we do things to simplify them and make them act like a real digital organization? So just because you can do something on your mobile phone or on your laptop doesn't mean it's digital. Digital is a mindset also, and that's a key thing to remember. Chris, what do you see?
Thanks, Jim. You know, from a best practices perspective, right? You know, we've hammered on this message a little bit, but you know, banks and insurance and wealth management companies, you know, need to realize that some segment of their population, both employees and customers, are never going to go back to the way it was. You know, it's just become too convenient for them to conduct business remotely or work remotely. You know, I have a personal experience. We closed on a couple pieces of property, you know, one in January, one in May, and the experience was entirely different, right? In January, I had to have a notary come to the house and, you know, check my license and, you know, go through all that. And then somebody came with, you know, 200 pages of paper copy and had to sign on all the dotted lines versus the transaction in May. You know, the notary was done remotely, all the documents were done via DocuSign, and, you know, lo and behold, it was a much more efficient, easy process. So, you know, I think the story of the day is, you know, banks need to embrace, you know, that digital mantra, as you said, and be, you know, prepared to adapt very quickly in the future, you know, because, you know, beyond COVID, you know, circumstances can change pretty dramatically, right? So, you know, I would say be proactive, be empathetic, be resourceful, empower your agents to retain customers. You know, in terms of, you know, why would you wait for a customer to get behind on a mortgage or a loan payment, you know, versus, you know, that first time you reach out to them to remind them that they're late on a payment. You know, you can very quickly enable the agent to get into a two-way dialogue around, you know, remediation strategies, you know, which will help retain that customer, not get you into a collection strategy, help you restructure the loan with the customer. I like to quote, you know, my favorite Gartner Maxism, which is it's, you know, 500 times more costly to go acquire a new customer than it is to keep an existing one. You know, and as GDP is expected to shrink rather significantly this year, you know, banks should be thinking about preserving as much of their customer base as possible, because it's going to pay good dividends while we recover.
That's great. You know, you keep on talking about empathy, and I think that we need to keep on remembering that at the end of the day, that's a key element of customer experience, is to make it so, you know, the customer says, you know, they want you to know them, they want you to understand them, they want you to reward them. Reward them is not like points necessarily. It's the relationship, the empathy. So, well, let's go to our next poll question. So the next poll question, and by the way, I'm the one who's at fault. The answer to the poll question will be shared after this session, so they are not done live in real time. So we share them afterwards. So, you know, what are the areas you most focus on to maintain your business continuity? It's efficiency in operations, intelligent communication and engagement, revamped employee communication with everybody doing work at home, or don't really know. So what are we most focused on from a business continuity perspective? Okay. I'd love to finish up, but I will share the fact that, you know, I remember when I worked in the banking world directly in a bank, we had all kinds of legacy systems. We have static employee communication. There's everything was piecemeal and different silos and everything else. But, you know, everything has changed so quickly now that we really have to react almost on a daily or a moment-by-moment basis. So how can financial firms communicate best with not only their customers and members, but also with their employees? How can they do this more effectively? And how do employees know what's changed and what they should do from an interaction perspective with customers? How do they how should they know the new processes and procedures are in place? Because, I'm telling you, I live in a relatively small world in regard to what's required of me. But in the banking world, it was tough even when you were working in a live environment in a branch. So, Chris, from your perspective, what are some of the best communication things you've seen out there?
From our perspective, name of the game is really over communication. Many customers are scared, lost their jobs. They've seen major chunk of their retirement get blown away, and are, generally anxious, right? I mean, the concept of, PTSD on a massive scale is something that sociologists are exploring at moment, right? And I think people are very anxious about getting back to business as usual, both customers and employees. So in this digital age, customers, employees, are comfortable swapping back and forth between channels. In fact, I think Gartner or Forrester's stated something like 90 to 95% of all customer interactions channel hop, right? So they may start in digital and end up in a voice transaction. So people are comfortable swapping between channels, and they expect there's some expectation of proactive engagement from the companies that they do business with. Everybody's familiar with the Amazon example. It's, you place an order and then you get 15 communications until that thing hits your doorstep and there's a picture of it, right? So you literally can't over communicate with people as long as it's contextual. And I think most banking customers are already receiving a lot of content, be it emails, text, in-app messaging. So moving forward, it's going to be important to use data, particularly specific customer data to drive good communication and guide agents in their workflows with customers. Because you quickly lose the thread if it's not on point, right? If you're trying to call somebody who's lost their job because you want to sell them a new credit card, that's not going to be well received, right? So if you can use data to drive a cohesive communication strategy across all your channels, it can be proactive, it can be contextual, it can be empathetic, and ultimately need to be highly relevant for that customer to keep them engaged. Ditto for employees. So we like to think about it as, kind of a mini series of engagement where the agent is guided, through that workflow with the customer, and the customer has, the concept of a journey with their bank, and expect everybody they speak to or interact with at the bank is empowered to help them along their journey. Back to my earlier example, right? Like if you send somebody a late payment reminder with the opportunity to speak to an agent and they call in to speak to that agent better be empowered if the conversation, ultimately, involves a customer saying, hey, I've lost my job, I'm having trouble making payments, I don't want to get behind, but I can't cover, and put food on the table. The agent should be able to get into a conversation around restructuring or deferring those payments and then continue to follow through to monitor the situation, right? Like a point in time conversation, where you can be extremely empathetic is great, but if you don't continue to follow through on that, you'll lose the thread with the customers. So if we're thinking through kind of the business outcomes, businesses want to be very thoughtful about setting up the right communication strategies and enabling their employees, because that's going to be a very critical next step as we move forward.
Yeah, I think, that is so key when we look at this. So we've covered some of the best practices and examples we're seeing out there, but we should talk about what's going on with leadership. I mentioned that earlier, that I think that's one of the key elements that in many cases may be a stumbling block. So how have financial organizations organized themselves to execute it with customers and internally? For example, how are IT and operations coming together? How is senior leadership in the financial services responding to employee concerns, resource constraints, and probably just as importantly now, with the external public because we're seeing a lot of social elements. And I think the leadership is also going to have to take a leadership with regard to how they're dealing with outside constituencies, both shareholders, but also general public. Jake, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to customer experience, the 2020 State of CX report was published last week. And in it stated the number one concern of leaders in customer experience has been this year, the strategy or the response was proving ROI to senior leadership on investments made in customer experience. And what I've seen, especially from a product investment perspective, is much less of this, let's find this new tool or this new CRM and spend the next 12 months going through RFPs, vendor selections, integrations, and launch. And more of this, let's have our IT product and engineering teams work together and work with operations to try a more small scale implementation of different fixes or different technologies or different digital tools. And we really want to see success now. So I think gone are the days of just saying, all right, let's move to this new platform or switch off this legacy platform, and more of this kind of land and expand model. And I think the CFOs and senior leadership aren't going to approve these large expenditures or these 2-year, multi-year contracts. And I think the realization is over the next couple of years, or the last few years rather, that these investments didn't deliver the cost savings they were promised and are now getting the act. And especially with kind of the unknown of the next few months, you're going to see a lot more of these senior leadership teams working with their operations teams to really figure out these small scale solutions that they can do and see how successful they are before they can grow those.
Tom, what are your thoughts?
Oh, Jim, you're seeing the new normal as work is an activity. It's not a place anymore. So there's a lot more activity-based costing models, taking a closer look at the overall enterprise. Even once the pandemic crisis subsides, both employers and employees are going to find value in the teleworker use cases we've been talking about today because of increased productivity, but also the corporate real estate optimization and reduced travel expenses. Our employees and customers are executing rapid deployment of teams to multiple locations. We're seeing more and more of that cloud-based model is very successful with tangible use cases, obviously being able to show ongoing economic benefit as well. One example, to ensure business connectivity, one of our customers, a top U.S. insurance company, needed to immediately deploy VPN capabilities and capacity due to office closures in over 20,000 locations across the U.S. This was a massive change management effort, as the VPN onboarding and the training was needed for employees, many who had never worked from home or utilized VPN before. So certainly, we talked about change management in this conversation, very much a significant change management shift for a lot of people. Over 100,000 employees were provisioned to securely work from home in just one weekend. And agents and strategic partners continue to serve their customers today and going forward. So accelerated efforts are currently in progress to satisfy customer demands and also employee business requirements, keeping that balance between customer and certainly workplace experience.
That's great. So we're going to move to our next poll question. We talked about what are the things you're most prepared for. So where is leadership falling short? What areas of your organization are you least prepared? Where do you think there's some falling short of overall? So as we're filling out that let's start a little bit of a rapid fire. So Jake, how would you define the best in class when all this is over?
Sure. I think I've talked about it a little bit on kind of what I've been talking about in this digital transformation, but I think overall best in class is going to be defined by lowering customer effort. There's a measurement other than NPS, which I don't necessarily like, measuring through customer service or CSAT, called customer effort score, and it basically goes on a scale from very easy to very difficult. How easy was it to interact with company blank? And I think that, you see examples like the Apple Card by Goldman Sachs. I just had to file a chargeback the other day, and I was able to do it in 3 taps. So I think lowering customer effort is going to be really defining best in class and what companies can look at.
So Tom, what do you see as the state of financial services in 12 months?
Well, Jim, some of the hot buttons, the FinServ operating model has certainly shifted with this unforeseen event. So industry leaders who are actively digitizing are going to continue to enjoy significant benefits in what we're seeing as a new normal. So that's improved disaster preparedness to ensure investor and shareholder confidence, increased familiarity among managers, reduces concerns and resistance related to productivity, having that greater C-suite transparency, having that awareness and potential to reduce real estate travel costs, particularly given the threat of another recession. And the CSR component is also critical around corporate social responsibility and sustainability benefits from reduced commuter and business travel.
Okay, so finally, Chris, how should banks, insurance firms, wealth firms define how they can lead and influence what's happening overall in society?
Sure. I think it's, given the times, particularly apropos that, the originator of one of my favorite quotes on leadership is Nelson Mandela, who's famous for saying these wise words: "It's better to lead from behind and put others in front, especially when you celebrate victory when nice things occur. You take the front line when there is danger, then people will appreciate your leadership." So paraphrasing, when times are tough, it's going to be important for, these banks and other firms to lead from the front, right? They're going to have to take uncomfortable positions and stand for something, in these unusual times.
I think it's interesting because when we look at that, we really have seen, because we're mostly at home and observing things, how firms are reacting differently to different situations. And it's amplified by the silence, I think, by everything that's going on around us. So let's do our last poll. So what areas of technology is your business most interested in going forward? Secure remote worker, cross-channel experience and analytics, deploying new operating models and safety guidelines, or overall digital transformation? So to wrap up this conversation, what's one key takeaway you would like to emphasize to the audience? Let's start with Chris.
Sure, thanks. From my perspective, having a clearly defined strategy for re-engagement with customers and work from home employees is going to be critical, right? Like pen to paper needs to happen, and businesses need to decide what they're going to do moving forward and communicate that clearly. I think there's a new high bar in terms of telebanking, convenient, secure customer interaction. Is going to be a must for banks, ditto for their employees. And, the understanding, what being COVIDed means is going to be critical to long-term retention for customers and valued employees. And, to many of our earlier comments, or even our earlier poll, being reactive is not going to cut it, right? People are going to need to plan 3 years out and be able to pivot pretty quickly, if they're not seeing that those strategies are being effective. Oh, I think you're muted, Jim.
Yeah. Tom?
Jim, Chris is spot on, and some of the priorities that we see, very much collaborative, strong leadership, communication between IT, business, and most importantly, our customers, critically important now more than ever before. Align capabilities with growth and cost strategies to drive digital transformation. Focus on specific use cases to empathize with and help your customers right away. And also work with the right strategic partners to help you get there.
Yeah, that's a key element. I think when we look at what's going on and the dynamics involved there, Tom, I think that's key. Jake, what are your thoughts as we wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. I'll go quick. I know we have a couple questions to address probably. I think my one key takeaway for everyone on the call is digital transformation doesn't mean the entire organization, and it doesn't mean you have to have a solution for every problem that customers are facing. I think, if one action for everyone to take away is start stack ranking what things are the highest impact to your business. What's the lowest effort and highest impact that you could digitize or bring in some digital transformation steps to your organization, and start chipping away at that. What's 5% of the volume that is the lowest level of customer satisfaction or the highest impact that you can take, and start there.
I think that's a great wrap up, and I think from my perspective, the wrap up is a couple things. Number one, change is not done, and what the change is happening right now faster than we've ever seen it before. But I don't think it's ever going to happen this slowly again. I think we have a dynamic here that as we look to the future, we're really going to be looking at a time that is going to continually evolve. It's going to definitely put those organizations that are prepared, both leadership-wise, employees, and structurally, for digitalization. The digital world is not going to go away. And those organizations can combine and find their lane, find a lane that they're going to be best at, and implement against that. It's going to be key, because those organizations, there's too much space out there for us all to be the same. And be it a small organization, big organization, we're all going to have to find what lane we're going to play, because there are going to be organizations that don't make it. I think we've discussed in pre-call that because of the dynamics of investment level and leadership and everything else, it's going to consolidate the industry, both from a banking perspective as well as from a fintech perspective. And those organizations that are not prepared for not only what the future is today, but what the future is tomorrow. We almost have to shoot ahead. I think it was Wayne Gretzky who said, I don't shoot for where the person is, I shoot for where they're going. I think as organizations and as individuals, we need to do that going forward. I really want to thank everybody who's been on the call today. And I want to make sure that, if you have any questions, feel free to write to us and we'll get to those answers, because we ran a little short on time. But I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to get any questions that they may have us to answer, that we can get to those. I want to thank my panel too, Jake, Tom, Chris, for your participation. I'm sorry that my finger is a little slow on the pickup on the anti-mute, but it's all this technology. We all have to transform ourselves. So thank you very much for your participation today.
Thanks, Jim. Good leadership.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, and finally, I'd like to thank everyone for attending the session. We hope you found it informative and valuable. Again, please take a moment to fill out the survey, and I hope everyone has a great day. Goodbye.